No, yes. Kisaka, shall we start?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar of the webinar series organized by BOTSOC, University of Colombo. BOTSOC, or else Botanical Society of University of Colombo, is one of the oldest and active student bodies in the Faculty of Science. And since its inception, BOTSOC has organized many projects ranging from community service projects to workshops in order to uh, achieve many objectives such as increasing the awareness and interest of plant science among everyone and also to develop the soft skills of the members. And this series of webinars, Sky Talks, was organized to create a platform between our alumni who are currently doing research abroad with our undergraduates to share their knowledge and experience that would inspire them. So today we are here with our third webinar of the series. So first of all, let me introduce our guest speaker of the day. She's Ms. Pumi Galage, a PhD candidate in the Department of Soil Science of University of Saskatchewan, Canada. And having completed her primary education in Anand Balika Vidyalaya and Devi Balika Vidyalaya, Colombo, she entered University of Colombo. And there she completed her BSc Special Degree in Plant Biotechnology. And afterwards, she completed her MSc in the Department of Soil Science, University of Saskatchewan. And also, when we consider her professional work experience, she has worked as a teaching assistant in the Department of Plant Science and also a research assistant in the Department of Botany, Open University. So on behalf of everyone, I would like to warmly welcome you to do the discussion today. So before we start, I have two requests from the audience. Can all of you please switch off your mics and videos so there won't be any interruptions during the session? And also, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, or else you can ask them in the end of the session where we have a Q&A session. So, shall we start, Ms. Pumi?
Yes, Kisaka, thank you for the nice introduction and good evening to you all first. And I would like to thank Professor Chandrika Nanayakkara, one of my mentors, and BOTSOC to giving me this wonderful opportunity. It's great to meet you all like this and having a chance to share some knowledge. Please give me a few seconds to share my screen with you all. I hope you all can see my screen, right?
Yes, Pumi, you can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So as everyone knows, I'm going to talk about cropping system sustainability with crop rotations with the help of my dissertation work. I was informed there are students from the level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I would like to start from the beginning. Some of the information may be too simple for some people, but please bear with me. We can start our talk from the evolution of um, the cropping systems. Also, since I'm doing my research in North America, the cropping system and some management practices I'm talking about may be very related to that region. However, this is a platform we can expand our knowledge. That would be great for all of us. So we can start from the continuous cropping system. Most of the crop producers in the world, especially in the North American region, traditionally relied on continuous cropping system. This is an agricultural system in which certain crops are repeatedly growing year after year on the same land. The plants may be the same or similar species. When it comes to popular crops used for continuous cropping, wheat, corn, and soybeans are the common crops often grown. There is a lot of buzz around continuous cropping. In industrial crop production, most crop producers use this cropping system as it is more profitable than switching crops in each year. Because this allows for farmers to have consistent crops throughout their entire farm, then the farmers plant their most profitable crop only using the same seed, same pest control, same machinery, and same growing method on their entire farm, which may increase the overall farm profitability. Continuous cropping encourages increased mechanization for planting, harvesting, and distribution of the pesticides and fertilizers across a large piece of land using specialized farm equipment. These practices reduce the labor required for production and increase the efficiency. So despite the benefits, this practice has counterproductive effects. Continuous cropping provides favorable habitat for weeds, diseases, and pests specific to the respective crop. Also, over-reliance on single chemicals has accelerated the development of resistant weed species, which has an immediate or long-term costs. Continuous cropping can also lead to soil nutrient losses due to excessive utilization of inorganic fertilizers, especially nitrates and phosphates. Over-fertilization results in high levels of residual nitrates, which could contaminate surface and groundwater bodies. This can lead to acute toxicity on aquatic organisms and human health issues as well. Application of excessive nitrogen fertilizers in continuous cropping systems plays a key role in emission greenhouse gases, especially nitrous oxide, since nitrogen is the substrate for nitrification and denitrification processes in soil. In addition, overuse of synthetic fertilizers causes the formation and accumulation of mineral salts that can lead the development of soil compaction layer that restricts both movement and storage of water, air, and key plant nutrients. Also, excessive use of synthetic chemicals alters the pH and that disturbs the soil microbial community balance. Weed control is much more difficult in a continuous cropping system. It is like you are spraying out lots and lots of money on ground that will produce no economic return in that year. So considering especially the weed problem and the other facts as well, farmers move to another agricultural management practice, which is termed as fallow period. This is also called as summer fallow, crop fallow. Basically, traditional farmers use summer fallow as a risk management strategy to improve chances of growing a crop in the following year. I think this is somewhat a new concept to us as Sri Lankans. So it would be better to get some kind of a brief idea about with summer fallow. Summer fallow or crop fallow is the practice of allowing land to lie idle during the growing season. It is kind of resting the ground for 1 year or one cropping season after growing the crops. The main objective, the main target of summer fallow is conserving soil moisture and weed control. So in the drier areas, fallow is very popular. Actually, it is largely a Western Canadian farming practice because most of the Canadian cultivated lands are in semi-arid region. In areas with better moisture conditions, the economics of summer fallow production are less attractive. In this case, land is either continuously cropped or left fallow every third or fourth year. Within the summer fallow period, crop producers follow some light tillage practices. That means disturbing the soil to control weeds. First, they allow weeds to germinate, then killing them before they set by tillage practice. So, fallow can be used as a weed control method for both perennial weeds and annual weeds. Many farms, particularly in the drier areas, crop producers use 50-50 summer fallow. That means 50% of annual cropland was summer fallowed in each year. This practice of fallow has long been considered as an effective risk management tool for producers, as I mentioned earlier. The additional moisture gained from summer fallow helps ensure there is an adequate moisture to grow a crop in the next growing season. A secondary benefit is the release of plant nutrients from the soil organic matter, which reduces the need for fertilizer application in the subsequent crop. I should say this is also kind of a rotation. In 1 year, they grow crops. In 1 year, after that year, they fallow the land. Again, in the other year, they grow crops. So this is kind of a crop, summer fallow, this is kind of a rotation. So there are rotational benefits. These rotational benefits include providing breaks in pest and disease cycles. Anyway, summer fallow also have several major disadvantages. Since the soil on fallow land is left bare for long period of time, the exposed soil is vulnerable to wind or water erosion. During the summer fallow year, soil microorganisms mineralize soil organic matter, releasing soil nutrients. This provides a short-term benefit of providing nutrients for the following crops, but in the long term, the soil's natural fertility is slowly degraded. Soil scientists stated that 30% of soil organic matter has already degraded within last 100 years in Canadian prairies because of these conventional cropping practices. Development of soil salinity is also an issue with summer fallow. This happened due to the raising of soil water table in bare lands due to the evaporation. Salts come to the shallow soil profiles with rising soil groundwater, and there are no plants to absorb salts in summer fallow. Because of that, salts will accumulate in the root zone and on the soil surface. So these inappropriate long-term land use and cultivation patterns results in permanent soil degradation, and that ultimately decrease the cropping system productivity. That means it directly attacks agricultural sustainability. You can see how the sustainable agriculture system defined. Sustainable agriculture is the efficient production of safe, high quality agricultural product while protecting and improving the natural environment, the social and economic conditions of the farmer, their employees and local communities, and safeguard of health and welfare of all farm species. So basically, agricultural sustainability is a complex idea with many facts, including economic aspect. It includes sustainable farms should be a profitable business that contributes to a robust economy. Also, it includes a social aspect. It should deal fairly with its workers and have mutually beneficial relationship with the surrounding community, and the environmental aspect. Environmental sustainability in agriculture means good stewardship of the natural systems and resources that farms rely on. This mainly involves building and maintaining healthy soil, managing water wisely, and minimizing air, water, and climate pollution, and promoting biodiversity. Recently, lots of research devoted to achieving these goals because now we realized farms managed using sustainable approach can avoid most of the negative impacts without sacrificing productivity or profitability, only by working with nature rather than against it. So, agrologists have worked with farmers to develop more sustainable farming systems, can use limited resources in a better way while reducing the conventional cropping practices. Also, with the development of new market opportunities, improvements in machinery design and soil management practices have stimulated significant change in crop management practices. So because of these reasons, crop producers are now interested in crop diversification. Crop diversification involves the allocation of different crop species into one cropping system. The aim of this crop diversification is increasing overall productivity and market stability by reducing the farm economic dependency on single crop. Crop diversification is beneficial for nutrient cycling, pest and disease control, soil conservation, and ecological diversification. However, different crops within a crop diversification system may need some specific knowledge about different crops, about their growth and management, as well as the knowledge about specific pests and diseases. We can talk about different cropping system under crop diversification. As you can see, one system is mixed farming, refers to the cropping system where two or more crops are cultivated in the same piece of land simultaneously. This technique is practiced to reduce the risk of total crop failure because of less rainfall or adverse climatic conditions. Second one is intercropping. That is a cropping technique in which two or more crops are cultivated simultaneously in the same piece of land, adhering to a specific row pattern in order to increase the productivity of the crops. And then the strip cropping is also a kind of similar intercropping. But strip cropping differs from intercropping in that the crop strips are sufficiently wide enough to permit cultivation of each crop separately. And in all of these cropping systems, different types of plants grow in the same land with the same time. The next one, the crop rotation, it is a kind of a this is some kind of a different than the other cropping systems, as I mentioned here. So today we are going to focus on crop rotation. Crop rotation have received considerable attention for past number of years. Basically, crop rotation is a practice of growing different crop species in the same land across a sequence of growing seasons. So this has a temporal effect. Focusing on the benefits in general, crop rotations increase soil fertility. Prolonged planting of the same crop leads to the depletion of specific nutrients in the soil. Each crop type has a different nutrient interaction with the soil, and each of them releases and absorbs different types of nutrients. Because of this, crop rotation increases the soil fertility by controlling deficient or excess nutrients because it replenishes nutrients that are not available or absorb nutrients that are not that are in abundance. It also increases and improves the soil organic matter caused by the microorganisms left by each type of crop planted. Talking about the breaking disease cycle, pest and disease cycle. Similar plants tend to have same pathogens. For an example, if we take Cucurbitaceae, the family which includes pumpkin, melon, cucumber, and bitter gourd, one of the major pests in that Cucurbitaceae family is cucurbit fly. So this cucurbit fly does not harm chilies. It just focuses only on cucurbit. If we put cucurbits in the same location throughout years, the fly will take permanent residence in the same location. But if we can rotate with chili or some kind of a different species, the fly will not be able to find any food source from the same location. The fly then has no option. So that fly has to choose another location. The fly cannot do any damage to the chili plants. So that is the principle behind that. Also, that limits soil erosion. Soil erosion is the carrying away of the most important topsoil layer by wind or water. When the soil is constantly covered by plants, the topsoil layer is protected and it is not carried away by water during heavy rainfall. The last factor that increases the yield, the availability of nutrients from the soil provides abundant nourishment to all plants, so ensuring success in the yield produced. Recently, crop producers are interesting to diversify their cropping systems with pulse crops. Pulse crops are members of the family Leguminaceae or Fabaceae. But pulse crops are a little bit different to the other members of the in the family Leguminaceae. The term pulse crops generally refers the plant species harvested primarily for dry seed that is used for both human food and animal feed. There are 4 commonly grown pulse crops in Canada: field pea, lentil, and dry bean, also chickpea. Soybean and peanut are also 2 other members in the legume family with which most people are familiar. However, these 2 are not considered as pulse crops, and instead they are referred as leguminous oil seed crops, because soybeans and peanuts have much higher fat content, whereas pulse contains virtually no fat. Pulse crops are also nitrogen fixing crops that improve the environmental sustainability of annual cropping systems. The inclusion of the pulse crops into cereal-based cropping system is well known for its rotational benefits. As the picture says, yes, it all starts from the legume root nodules. Nodules that form on legume roots containing superior strains of nitrogen fixing bacteria which fix atmospheric nitrogen for legume or pulse crops and contribute nitrogen nutrition for the following crops as well. So this is the major reason for almost all the rotational benefits of the pulse crops. So this symbiotic nitrogen fixation is important to reduce dependency of the rotation on nitrogen fertilizer. Basically, cereal-based cropping systems largely depend on non-renewable energy extensively, and 70% of that non-renewable energy is because of inorganic fertilizers, especially nitrogen fertilizers. So reducing amounts of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers applied to farmland will they will undoubtedly reduce greenhouse gas emission. Reduction of the greenhouse gas emission consequently decrease the carbon footprint. I'm sorry. Also, the inclusion of the pulse crops in rotation can increase disease incidences and weed populations in the following crops. That leads to reduction of investment risk, and also that consequently increases the soil fertility. Obviously, pulse crops are beneficial, yet there are some concerns as well. Pulse crops produce lesser amount of crop residues compared to cereals, especially wheat. So there is a poor ground cover that makes soil surface to expose more and increase the water and wind erosion. Because of the cropping system has many plants, farmers may need specific knowledge for sowing and managing the crops for decision making. That may also serve as a common host for some pests and diseases. The last factor is market uncertainty. Actually, in Canada, pulse crop industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The export market experiences kind of uncertainty in 2017 because of the export regulations in other countries. So that's why there is a market uncertainty. So my master's thesis project was focused mainly on the impact of including pulse crops in wheat-based cropping systems on soil quality. Here we compare the effect of continuous wheat cropping systems versus cropping systems with different pulse crops. I will describe my study later. Before that, I think it would be better to have an idea about the soil quality, because there are so many definitions for that, and some people define the soil quality considering it as soil fertility. That is completely wrong. So moving on to the soil quality, simply the soil quality is how well soil does what we want it to do. So different people have different ideas of what quality soil is. For an example, for the environmentalist, it may mean soil functioning at its potential in ecosystem with respect to maintenance or enhancement of biodiversity, water quality, and nutrient cycling. Since we are looking at the soil quality with the agricultural perspective, we want to relate that to sustain or enhance cropping system productivity and maximize the profits. So this is one of the best definitions I found for soil quality. It defines the soil quality as a capacity of living soil to function within natural or managed ecosystem boundaries, to sustain plant and animal productivity, to maintain or enhance water and air quality, and to support plant and animal health. Scientists use soil quality indicators to evaluate how well soil functions, since soil functions often cannot be directly measured. Measuring soil quality is an exercise in identifying soil properties that are responsive to management, affect or correlate with environmental outcomes, and are capable of being precisely measured within a certain technical and economic constraints. So the quality indicators may be qualitative or quantitative. There are three main categories soil indicators: chemical, physical, and biological. These different soil properties give different informations on soil condition. As you can see, there are soil properties under these three indicators. I included only the parameters I took for my master's study thesis. There are many more parameters than that. Under physical soil parameters, we can measure soil moisture, soil aggregate size, bulk density, and under chemical parameters, soil pH, electrical conductivity, nutrients such as total carbon, total nitrogen, organic carbon, and C/N ratio, potential nitrogen mineralization. And under soil biological parameters, soil microbial abundance and organic matter content, we can measure. I must say soil quality attempts to integrate all these three types of indicators. The categories do not neatly align with various soil functions. So integration is a must. Integration is very necessary. So we can move on to my master's thesis study. I'm not going to describe it in very detail, just want to give you a brief idea about what I did in my master's thesis project. This study is a part of big crop rotation research, actually. The main research included 2 cycles of 4-year rain-fed crop rotation study, which was established in 2011, as you can see in the diagram. And in my study component is focusing only on the second cycle, the cycle I pointed out with green color. Only the last 2 years, 2017 and 2018. This study was conducted with 4 crop rotation treatments involving 3 pulse crops, namely chickpea, field pea, and lentils, grown alternatively with wheat. Actually, we use these pulse crops based on their rooting depth. We will talk about the rooting depth impact later, but I just want to let you know why we did this selection. Wheat has the deepest rooting system among these crops, which goes up to 120 to 150 centimeters. Among the pulse crops we choose, chickpea has the deepest rooting system compared to field pea and lentils. Chickpea root goes up to 70 to 80 centimeters, and lentils and field pea roots goes up to 50 to 60 centimeters. So basically, we need to compare the impact of using pulse crops with different rooting depths on soil quality as well. So back to my study, there were 4 treatments, and one base for the study, continuous wheat, was used as the base treatment. The first treatment is field peas alternated with wheat. The second one is lentils alternated with wheat. Third one is chickpea alternated with wheat. And the last treatment is a combination of lentils and chickpeas. The treatments were randomized, they arranged according to the randomized complete block design with 4 replicates. We collected soil sampling at early spring in 2017 and 18. For better understanding, I made the relevant phases of the crop rotation in darker color. These are the 2 phases of the crop rotation I collected soil samples from. And we collected 60 centimeter deep soil cores were collected from each plot, and each cover was divided into 3 segments based on the depth. 0 to 15, 15 to 30 centimeters, 30 to 60 centimeters. I analyzed different parameters that I mentioned before in soil in each and every treatment yearly. So we can move on to what kind of impacts pulse crops have on the soil quality. First one is impact on soil moisture conservation. Available soil moisture content plays a vital role on the productivity and product quality of the production system, especially when there is a low and variable rainfall. That is a burning issue in Canadian prairies, actually. Appropriate rotation system with more efficient water usage can be designed by identifying the mechanism behind the utilization of soil water. One strategy to develop a cropping system with more efficient water usage is choose an appropriate crop sequence for the crop rotation system. Rooting depth and the time of maturity are major 2 factors that we considered and that should be considered when selecting the sequence of the crops in the rotation. So if we look into the rooting depths, I made this table of plants with different rooting depths. I included popular field crops in Canadian prairies into it. You can see comparatively, pulse crops have shallower rooting depths compared to the other crops. Shallow rooting depths may leave more nutrients and more water in the soil for subsequent deep rooting crops. Here in our study, we inserted pulse crops with wheat So pulse crops use water in shallower rooting depths, shallower soil depths, and save water in deeper soil profiles for wheat. Also, I mentioned earlier, chickpea has kind of a deeper rooting system, deeper rooting depth compared to the other pulse crops we used. So chickpea absorb water from more deeper soil profiles than other pulse crops, field pea and lentils. So when the crops have variations in their rooting depths, it conserves water in different soil profiles. As a result, we have more opportunities to diversify the cropping system with adding more crops. Moreover, field pea and lentils use 15 to 35% less water than wheat. That implies pulse crops are more able to survive under low moisture conditions. That is also an advantage under dry climatic conditions. So our next slide is impact on the soil structure. The soil structure describes the arrangement or the way of soil in of the soil parts of the soil and pore spaces located between the soil particles. It is determined by how individual soil granules clump, bind together, and aggregate, resulting in the arrangement of soil pores between them. Soil aggregates play a major role in soil structure. You can notice soil aggregates when you pick up handful of soil and it breaks apart into little pieces. You can notice the soil aggregates. You are looking at soil aggregates. Each aggregate is made up of soil particles of different sizes, held together by both the attraction of the soil particles and binding of soil organic matter between the soil particles. The formation of aggregates in soil is kind of a complex process regulated by physical, chemical, and biological processes. The major physical chemical processes are flocculation and shrink swelling behavior of expansive dry masses. The prominent biological processes include activities of soil fauna, that is production of sticky exudates by soil microorganisms and binding of soil particles by the plant roots and fungal hyphae. Moving on to the functions of soil aggregates, the crucial soil physical property is important to protect soil organic matter from degradation. Soil aggregates tightly bind with organic matter and minimize the exposure of organic matter to the environment. So it is harder to degrade the organic matter in the aggregates by the soil microorganisms. Also, soil aggregates develop appropriate movement of soil air and water by creating soil pores. Consequently, this increases the microbial activity. Also, aggregated soil decreases susceptibility of erosion by development of better water infiltration. Based on the diameter of the soil particles, soil consists of three categories. Actually, there are three categories, but I mentioned only two categories. So we can also divide that into two categories, namely macro aggregates and micro aggregates. Macro aggregates are more than 250 micrometers in diameter, and micro aggregates are less than 250 micrometers in diameter. Microaggregates are silt and clay particles tightly bound by organic materials. This provides a long-term pool for organic matter. So microaggregates are very much important to store most stable carbon pool in soil. Macroaggregates are collection of silt, clay particles, also microaggregates and organic matter. Plant roots, mycorrhizae, and earthworms are major contributors to formation of macroaggregates. The larger aggregates have shorter breakdown time, providing organic matter source for roots, bacteria, and fungi. So higher abundance of macro aggregates decreases the susceptibility of soil to erosion by wind, water, and tillage. So in our study, we analyzed the aggregate size distribution using dry sieving method. Here, aggregates were separated into 8 size ranges, as I mentioned on the graph. Actually, we got kind of interesting result. The continuous wheat cropping system had, you can see the continuous wheat represented by the yellow color line. So the continuous wheat cropping system had the highest amount of largest macro aggregates compared to the pulse crop rotations. So the formation of larger macro aggregates was not influenced by the pulse crop rotations according to our results. This result was inconsistent with some of the other studies. Other studies reported that pulse crops increase the formation of macro aggregates, while continuous cereals increase the formation of micro aggregates. Because they stated that macro aggregates formation mainly depends on plant root formation, and plants with taproot and coarse roots, such as pulse crops, facilitated the development of macro aggregates, and plants with fibrous roots and fine roots, such as wheat cereals, they develop micro aggregates. Another important fact is the formation of macro aggregates relies on the production of large amount of polysaccharides gel by fungi and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. We did phospholipid fatty acid analysis for the microbial community, but we couldn't see any differences of fungi and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi between those treatments. So unfortunately, so far, this is an unexplainable result. However, the soil samples for the microbial analysis, we collected them before seeding, and it might not represent the microbial population during the crop growth. Changes in fungal and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungal biomass that occur during the plant growth may stimulate the macro aggregation in continuous wheat cropping system in the surface soil. So that's what we think. So from this result, I just want to show we normally get mixed results in research, not the expected results every time. And moving to the impact of nitrogen dynamics. As a key plant nutrient, nitrogen is much more important for the plant growth and development, as it is a major chemical element in proteins, nucleic acid, chlorophyll, and energy transfer compounds. In agriculture the fertilizer nitrogen application enhances biomass yields, but excessive nitrogen leads to many adverse effects on the quality of the economic product and the environment, as we described or as we discussed earlier. Therefore, identify strategies that achieve high crop yields and simultaneously reduce inorganic fertilizer input is a priority for developing sustainable cropping system. Pulse crops improves cropping system nitrogen dynamics in 2 ways: biological nitrogen fixation and crop residue mineralization. Moving on to the biological nitrogen fixation, pulse crop have significant benefits over many crop species due to the potential of fixing atmospheric nitrogen. Biological nitrogen fixation is the second largest global nitrogen contribution next to synthetic fertilizers. We all know this process is governed by rhizobia, and these bacteria live in small growths in the roots. We call them nodules. In cropping systems, pulse crops must be well inoculated or well nodulated for maximum nitrogen fixation and rotational benefits. For the majority of situations, farmers will need to inoculate the seed or soil with the appropriate strain of rhizobia at sowing in order to ensure good levels of nodulation. Different pulse crops may require different inoculants. In our study, we used two kinds of inoculants, rhizobial inoculants for different pulse crops we used. Another study found that pulse crops inoculated with the proper rhizobium strain have the potential to fix 50 to 80% of nitrogen requirement through nitrogen fixation, although the amount differs by the crop type. However, even though the rhizobial community may be present in the soil, the native strains may not be the most effective nitrogen fixers for the particular crop. Inoculation of the pulse crops, pulse seeds with rhizobial bacteria will result in optimum nitrogen fixation and yield. Mineralization of crop residues is another way to that pulse crop do their nitrogen sparing. Normally, based on the C/N ratio of the plant residues, we categorize them as high quality and low quality plant residues. If the C/N ratio is high, it means the carbon content is higher and nitrogen content is lower. Those plants residues are considered as low quality plant residues. For an example, C/N ratio of cereal crops. They are around 70 to 1 to 100 to 1. They belong to low quality residues. If I explain more, if we get wheat, the average C/N ratio is 80 to 1. That means the wheat crop has 80 units of carbon to 1 unit of nitrogen. If we can find crop residues with low C/N ratio, that means with more nitrogen, then that is considered as high quality residues. For an example, pulse crops. They have around 20 to 1 to 40 to 1 C/N ratio. You may confuse why do we consider crop residues as low or high quality. The high and low quality of the residues shows the decomposition ability of the residues by soil microorganisms and nitrogen cycling. The optimum C/N ratio is 24 to 1 for desired decomposition of crop residue. The ratio 24 to 1 is the proper carbon and nitrogen that microorganisms must have in order to sustain its health. What would happen if we added residues with higher C/N ratio to the soil, such as wheat straw, with the C/N ratio of 80 to 1? Since wheat straw contains a greater proportion of carbon to nitrogen ratio than the 24 to 1, the microbes will have to find additional nitrogen from the soil to go with the excess carbon to consume the wheat straw. This situation could create a deficit of nitrogen in the soil until some of the microbes die, decompose, and release nitrogen, that is mineralization. So we term this situation as immobilization, nitrogen immobilization. Conversely, what would happen if we added residues with lower C/N ratio, such as pulse crops with 20 to 1 C/N ratio? Since there are lesser proportion of carbon to nitrogen than 24 to 1, the microbes will consume the residues with leave the excess nitrogen in the soil. The surplus nitrogen in the soil will be available for growing plants. In our study, the inclusion of the pulse crops into wheat-based rotation did not provide additional advantage, additional nitrogen advantage compared to the continuous wheat cropping system at any soil depth. This may be because at crop harvest, a considerable fraction of nitrogen in pulse crops, which is stored in grains removed from the field. Also, pulse crops produce a little amount of residues. The residual contribution for the nitrogen may has a minor impact. So that's what we thought. The crop productivity, this is the impact of pulse crops on crop productivity. Crop productivity is the quantitative measurement of crop yield produced within a known area. The primary objective of crop production is to maximize the transformation of the resources into useful products. Studies worldwide shows that yield of cereals grown after pulse crops are higher compared with the same crops grown after a non-pulse crop. Pulse crops tend to produce more branched roots, facilitating water and nutrient uptake under stressful conditions and increasing the grain yield. Pulse crops increase the yield of subsequent wheat crop by about 20%, according to some studies. However, contradictory results can be observed from the different pulse crops with varying rooting depths and different growing conditions. We can explain that using the graph on the next slide. This is the graph we developed from all the grain yield we received throughout the 8 years of the crop rotation study. A represent the grain yield at the pulse crop phases, or all the pulse crop phases, and B represent wheat crop phases, all the wheat crop phases in 8-year pulse crop rotation study. Grain yield at pulse phases in a given rotation marked with same letter means there is no yield difference during the course of study at the 0.05 significant level. You can see in P and little extent to lentil positively influence subsequent wheat yield. P had a larger benefit than lentil, while chickpea has, you can see chickpea has no influence in wheat yield. The neutral effect of the chickpea on the yield of the following wheat was mainly attributed to water depletion by chickpea. Typically, water is primary limiting factor for crop production in the semi-arid region. Chickpea has a deep root system compared with the lentils and peas, as I described earlier, and it can extract water to a depth around 80 centimeters or 100 centimeters, comparable to cereals, leaving less soil residual water for the following wheat crop. However, in my study, there were both noticeable differences and neutral effects in the introduction of grain legumes with different rooting depths into wheat-based cropping systems regarding the overall soil quality. Our conclusion was within a short time duration, it's very hard to see significant differences on soil quality. Soil quality parameters takes longer period of time to develop and to show changes. So at least more than 10 or 15 years crop rotations are required to see such soil quality differences. I think it's a little bit boring to just listening for this continuously. So just to distract you all and keep you awake, I would like to show you all an interesting video that will this video shows how massive the farming practices in Canada and how do they use sophisticated machines and vehicles in their cropping practices and operations. So this video is about fertilizing and harvesting wheat in Saskatchewan, where I'm living in right now. Let's watch it right now. So after taking a break, so I started my PhD thesis study after I completed my master's with the same approach, the approach of developing sustainability in the crop production. But here I focused on both the oilseed crops and pulse crops in wheat-based cropping system. The overall objective of my PhD dissertation work is to determine the impact of different oilseed crops on biological nitrogen fixation of subsequent pulse crops, and determine the impact on ultimate crop productivity of cropping system. So oilseed crops are grown primarily for the oil contained in the seeds. I think you all are familiar with soybeans and sunflower crops. These crops are cultivated as oilseed crops. Can you remember we went through the evolution of cropping system? There we talk about the crop diversification with different crops, alternative crops. So oilseed crops are considered as another alternative crop like pulse crops to diversify the cropping systems. Since I do my research here, I have to talk about the oilseed crops in Canada. The oilseeds grown in Canada are soybeans, sunflowers, canola, flax, and mustard. Canola, camelina, and mustard are well adapted to the cool, short season conditions found on the Canadian prairies. These three oilseed crops belongs to the Brassicaceae family. Brassicaceae crops are widely adopted and cultivated around the world for human consumption and livestock feed. I'm not sure whether you all know about the canola plant. Anyway, let's talk about the specialty of that plant later. So moving on to the benefits of oilseed crops in rotations have been described extensively in the literature. Brassicaceae crops have been suggested as a means to mitigate effects of plant diseases as an alternative disinfectant method. This is called as biofumigation. This is kind of interesting because the biofumigation is simply the suppression of various soil-borne pests and diseases through naturally occurring compounds. Some synthetic pesticides have been withdrawn due to the harmful effects to human health and to the environment. So replacing synthetic pesticides with natural compounds with antibiological properties that will be environmentally and economically beneficial. The biofumigation effect of brassica crops result in mainly due to the plant secondary metabolite called glucosinolate. I added the basic chemical structure of glucosinolate for your knowledge. Brassica plants are rich sources of glucosinolates, which impart a characteristics of pungent or the spicy flavor profile to these plants. Glucosinolates contain sulfur and nitrogen, and these secondary metabolites are derived from amino acids. To date, there are more than 200 different glucosinolates have been identified. Generally, glucosinolates are biologically inactive. When the plant tissues are crushed or chewed, glucosinolates are hydrolyzed into biologically active isothiocyanates by the enzyme myrosinase, which is present in plant cell but separately. So you can see the chemical reaction I just mentioned for your knowledge. A wide range of degradation products are formed by the hydrolysis of the glucosinolates, not only the isothiocyanates, thiocyanates, nitriles, thionnitriles, depending upon the pH and other conditions. At neutral pH, isothiocyanates is the dominant product, which is more toxic to wide range of pests and pathogens. So that prevents bacterial infection, fungal infestation, nematode invasion in the roots, and insect infestation. Also, different brassica oilseed crops contain different levels of glucosinolate with diverse composition, results different biocidal activities. Even though canola is brassica crop, it contains very low amount of glucosinolate because canola was that is a breed from rapeseed cultivars, and plant breeders in Canada improved the fatty acid composition, especially the erucic acid, and marked reduction in the level of glucosinolate in canola. So moving back to the impacts of inclusion of brassica oilseed crops in cropping systems. Brassica crop increase inorganic soil nitrogen during the fallow period following the harvest to a greater extent than cereals, in some instances even legumes. A detailed study using various expected glucosinolate hydrolysis products demonstrated that isothiocyanates inhibit nitrification, because isothiocyanates being shown to inhibit nitrite forming bacteria. Brassica crops residues have a narrow C/N ratio, 8 to 1 normally in average, and there is a low lignin concentration. So that helps to maintain higher carbon mineralization rates. So crop residues of brassica oilseed crops may have the potential to be utilized as organic sources of nitrogen and other nutrients in agricultural production system. The accelerated decomposition of oilseed crop residue may enhance soil erosion. And considering these, all of these benefits, there is a possibility to develop more sustainable cropping system with pulse and oilseed crops in semi-arid regions than traditional cropping systems. However, there are fewer studies that investigated the impact of brassica oilseed crops with pulse crops in wheat-based rotations on the soil nitrogen dynamics, but it remains questionable how brassica crops impact on biological nitrogen fixation in subsequent pulse crops. In addition, the information on the sustainability and impacts of the inclusion of brassica oilseed crops into cropping systems with major field crops is limited. So my study will be carried out to fill the knowledge gap on how Brassicaceae oilseed crops effect on biological nitrogen fixation capacity of succeeding pulse crops, lentil and field pea, and crop productivity in a cereal cropping system under different growing environments in semi-arid Canadian prairies. The capacity of biological nitrogen fixation mainly depends on pulse crop nodulation, which is controlled by the amount of soil available nitrogen and microbial community among the other factors. Studies showed inorganic soil nitrogen increases after the application of brassica crop residue. Possible reasons for the high soil nitrogen availability include a greater mineralization of brassica crop residues due to a low C/N ratio and the nitrification inhibition, and also reduced microbial immobilization of nitrogen compared to non-brassica crops. In addition, Brassicaceae crops produce glucosinolates, which release several biologically active products, toxic products, mainly isothiocyanates. They are toxic on most of the soil microorganisms. So these products may alter the soil nitrogen, microbial activity, and consequently alter biological nitrogen fixation. It is unclear as to which of these mechanisms might be the most important for biological nitrogen fixation and soil nitrogen dynamics. A comprehensive understanding of glucosinolate containing plants impact soil nitrogen process is necessary to optimize the use of brassica crops in rotations. Therefore, this aspect of this project is necessary to determine the contribution of brassica crop residues in biological nitrogen fixation and soil nitrogen dynamics. Moving on to my research study. Our study is a field experiment. It contains a field experiment with a 5-year cycle study. The field experiment was established at 3 test sites. The major crop, 3 types of major crops are used under cereal, spring wheat, and under oilseed, Argentine canola, camelina, industrial mustard, oriental mustard, and yellow mustard, and under pulse crops, yellow pea and red lentil. So moving on to the treatments, the study includes 9 crop rotation treatments and continuous wheat treatments, as you can see. The treatments from number 2 to 5 contain 5 different brassica species in 2019 and 2020. All of them have field piece. From the treatments 6 to 10, they all contained the same brassica species that we used in 2020, and they had lentils. The treatments are arranged in a randomized complete block design with 4 replicates. This is a chart which I made to show different analyses we are going to do to achieve our objectives in my field study. Field study is the main study of my research. In addition to that, there are 3 controlled environment growth chamber studies as well. But I think field study would be enough to get the brief idea, the major idea about my research. All the brassica seeds will be analyzed for the glucosinolate content. The glucosinolate content will be analyzed using the methanol extraction and the HPLC analysis. And the collected root nodules in the pulse crop phase will be used for 2 types of analysis. First analysis is quantifying the abundance of diazotrophs by qPCR. Actually, we analyzed here the NIF gene expression. And the second analysis is root nodule dry weight. Moving on to the next one is the estimation of biological nitrogen fixation capacity. Biological nitrogen fixation ability will be assessed in the pulse crop phase in 2020 using 15 nitrogen enriched isotope dilution technique. So unfortunately, I don't have sufficient results to show the impact of these different rotations so far because of the current COVID condition and due to the limited laboratory access. Most of the analysis took so much of time than expected. So I'm looking forward to get so meaningful results sooner and see the bigger picture about the impact. Before I end in my talk, I would like to remind the great support I received from my co-supervisors, committee members, and lab technicians, and the technicians at all my field studies. Without them, it would be harder to achieve the success of my research studies. Also, thank you all for listening to me and bear with me for more than, for more than 1 hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Purumi. It was very interesting. If anyone has any question, you can unmute your mic and ask now. Do we have questions from the audience?
Purumi, hello.
Yes, madam.
Good to see you.
Yes, madam. It's a pleasure to meet you all like this, actually.
Yeah, so it seems all the participants can understand better than me. That is why they are not having questions, but I am having some questions. Yes, a few things I noted down. You said there's a fallow season.
Yes.
Yes, in Sri Lanka also we have with the rice cultivation, we leave it to fallow between the Yala and Mahakanna. So it is also practiced here. And also if you take Chena cultivation, we have the same kind of practice after cultivating for several days, you just leave it and go. But what was intriguing there, actually, now you said it helps to conserve moisture, okay, as a plus point, and as a negative point, you said it increases evaporation and then leads to salinization.
Yes.
So I find it kind of contradictory.
Yes, yeah, that is the thing, because when we leave the site or leave the land for one growing season, uh, there are no plants, so the rainfall can conserve in the soil, so that will be a plus point. But the same reason, because there are there are no plants on the land, the evaporation ability increases because there is no cover on the ground, so the land is much more exposed to environment. So there is a yes, you are right, madam, there is a like a there is some kind of a contradictory points in those reasons I gave, but majorly in that very much important to conserve the water much more than the other issues. So most of the farmers are doing the that fallow period or summer fallow, mainly targeting to the moisture conservation.
Thank you, Pumi. My other question is actually for the benefits of the students. You use two different types of pulse crops in your master's experiment, I think.
It's three, madam.
Right.
Three different.
Three
Yes,
different.
yes,
But
yes, madam.
you had inoculations with the nitrogen fixing bacteria. For
Yes, madam.
different pulse crops, you have different bacteria.
Yes, madam.
Can you explain why?
Because the nitrogen fixation, actually, frankly, I don't know the exact reason behind that. Why it is more working with the specific crop. I frankly, I don't know about that, the exact reason.
Okay, Fumi, I think that is because of the specificity of the relationship.
Yes, the
Bacteria
mutual
and
relationship.
yes,
Yes,
yes, that
yes,
is, so they are very, very specific in their relationship. That's why most probably.
yes.
Yes. And the other one is where you were working with oilseed crops, and you said that it inhibits nitrification and that will conserve nitrogen, soil nitrogen.
Yes,
Again,
as
again,
yeah,
I would like you to explain that a bit more.
yes, madam. Conserve nitrogen in the aspect of conserving the ammonium ions, like ammonium ions, the nitrification of ammonium into nitrates. So the nitrates will be reduced, but the ammonium, in the form of ammonium, it will conserve in the soil, in the land. So that's what I meant in that.
Yeah, most probably because then denitrification will not take place.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, madam.
Yes. Thank you, Pumi.
Thank you, madam.
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Hello. So I have a question. So it's involving in Sri Lanka. So nowadays in Sri Lanka, the Sena caterpillar problem is a huge problem. So can we use the crop rotation mechanism to get a solution as to this problem?
Yes, Pasindu, I think we can, because crop rotation can, as I said earlier, crop rotation can eliminate or reduce, not, we can't say eliminate, reduce the pest, break the pest and disease cycle. So that will be an ideal solution for that issue. But the problem is in Sri Lanka, crop rotation obviously it does, but the pulse crop introduction is not that much ongoing in cultivated lands. So that's what, but for your answer, yes, we can.
Thank you.
Pumi, it's regarding this biofumigation.
Yes.
So you can use like Brassicaceae plants, but like how many crop cycles are needed to achieve effective levels? Like just one cycle is enough? Or?
Actually, we don't know about that, sir, yet, because the problem is the glucosinate that I mentioned, that is higher in seeds, but lower in the crop residues. Anyway, we are removing the seeds from the field as harvest. So there is no glucosinolate effect from the seeds to the land anyway. We are actually, that's what we want to check whether the residual effect, whether the glucosinate content in residues has an impact for the biofumigation. So we don't know about that yet, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Pumi, we would like to know about your academic career during starting from the when you were an undergraduate. Can we know a little bit information about that?
Yes, I actually, after entered into the university, then I selected for the plant biotechnology specialization degree. So then we, after that 4 years, then I worked as a demonstrator, teaching assistant in the same department, in the Department of Plant Sciences. And after that period ends, I actually, that is with the help of Dr. Chandrika Nanayakkara, Professor Nanayakkara, I got a chance to work as a research assistant in the Open University in Sri Lanka. And also, I just want to state that I'm in bachelor degree, I got a second lower degree actually. Most of the people think, most of the students think they can't go for higher studies when they have a second lower degree like that. So I think you can definitely, if you try, definitely you can go for higher studies, even though you have no second upper or first class. You can try for that. So I just want to motivate you all. If you are suffering, if you have low results or something like that, but you have to you can try for that. Then fortunately I got an opportunity to do my master's in the University of Saskatchewan in 2016. So I came here. Then within 2.5 years, I completed my master's studies. That's what I explained. And just after finishing my master's study, I started my PhD under the same supervisors of my master's study. So this is my second year of my PhD research. Yeah, so that's what.
Piyumi, I also want to add something to your comment. I
Yes.
think we like, as you said first class or second level, like class doesn't matter. But I think
No.
the research, like, I mean, the research component, like if you have a strong research background, I think it will be helpful, right?
Yes, definitely, Pubudu. It is, because actually what I did in my bachelor's, it is a great research. I can explain in front of anyone without any hesitation, because it is a very weightful and very important research. So because of the research content, you can get chances for the higher studies. Definitely, it is true. Thank you,
Yeah,
Pubudu.
like the idea should be, like we have to put more effort to do the research, because like I know that like most undergraduate like doesn't care of the research, so like they take it easily. But my point is they shouldn't. They have to like put more effort.
Yes, it is. Yeah, you are correct. You are correct. Yes.
Miss Piyumi, we would like to know a little bit about your undergraduate research.
Actually, it is about phosphate solubilizing fungi, that is Trichoderma virens. I tried to solubilize Epavala rock phosphate in some content to increase the solubility of the Epavala rock phosphate using that inoculum, that fungal inoculum. So actually, I did my bachelor research in Batalegoda Research Institute. So I got so much of positive results. Yeah, there is a effect. We can still use my research results showed there is a potential to use Epavala rock phosphate with that inoculum. There is a positive results.
Thank you, Miss.
Hello, Piyumi. Hello.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Pasan Piyumi. I don't have a question. I just want to wish you all the best. It's nice to hear your talk and hear about your work, and just all the best for the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Seems like there are no more questions to ask. So I would like to thank Ms. Pivmi for spending her valuable time despite the time difference during the session. And
Thank you
also
so
I would
much.
like to hello. I'd like to thank Ms. Pivmi for her very interesting department head, Professor Chandrika Nayakara, for helping us in contacting her, and also Dr. Samira Aryavansa for his constant guidance and support throughout the session. And also thank you everyone for joining us with the session today. Hope everyone will join us in the upcoming webinars. So,
I should also want to thank all of you, BOTSOC, and my lecturers in the plant science department. Thank you, all of you, to inviting me. And this is a great chance to share my knowledge with you. Thank you so much, and good luck with you all.
Thank you, Pivmi.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Ms. Pivmi, for joining.
Thank you, Vinny.
Good night.
Good night.